Good night.
Good
It's morning for
afternoon.
me.
Yeah, it's morning for me too. So, hello everyone. Welcome to the 11th episode of Coffee and Culture's Genshin Impact Lore podcast. One more cup of coffee. So, I'm one of your hosts for today. My name is Jside from the Genshin Guys podcast. So greetings, travelers. Welcome, welcome. But you can all call me Josh.
And I'm your second host, Cipher. Hi, hi.
How, how are you doing today, Cipher?
I'm fine. You?
I'm doing great. And today, in this episode of One More Cup of Coffee, we'll be joined by the lore archon herself, Ashikai. Ashikai, how are you doing today?
I am awake. Hello.
Good morning.
Hey, Ashikai, could you tell us a bit more about yourself? Where can we find you? Twitter, YouTube?
Yep, mainly just Twitter and YouTube. Twitter was an accident. YouTube was also an accident. Um, yep, yep. It's
Happy little accidents.
youtube.com/channel/Ashikai, and then Twitter is also just at Ashikai.
Yeah, you should
Great.
totally check them out. But don't do it at night. You will get into a rabbit hole and you will lose sleep. Don't be like me.
Yeah, Ashikai, like you're pretty known online for your Genshin lore videos. You have a lot of very lengthy, very detailed videos describing Genshin's lore. Of course, of Genshin Impact is what we're talking about here. So, what made you interested in Genshin lore in the first place?
Do you want the whole backstory or do you want like the highlights?
Give us what you got.
Um, all right. Well, I was mostly making like little comments for Fire Emblem Heroes on my YouTube channel originally. It was just like for fun, just for friends and stuff. And at the same time, I really got into Zelda theorists on YouTube. Like
Mm.
if you've ever stumbled down the Zelda rabbit hole and there's like a whole sub community of people who just make theory videos for the Zelda series and that's it. So I fell down that one.
Wow.
And around the same time, Genshin came out and I was casually and it was fun and it was like filling that Breath of the Wild hole that was left after I finished the game and I was like, I can't go back and play this again. I will cry
Mm.
if I have to find one more Korok. Um and
Oh, the Koroks.
yeah, yeah, that was fun. So I started playing Genshin and I didn't really think that the story was going to be great because it's a gotcha game, right? Like they're usually pretty
Pretty
mid
basic, right?
at
Yeah.
best. And I won't say that Genshin's writing is particularly stellar, but like once I really started getting into the world building, I realized that this actually is phenomenal world building. Like it's deep, it's wide, it's like chock full of references upon, you know, everything's linked together. So around the time that We Will Be Reunited came out, I had a thought about how Genshin and Honkai might be connected. So I decided, well, I'm gonna just try and put it into a video. Really hard for me to just like write a text post and have that be the only thing that's there. So I did that, and then I didn't look at the comments for like, oh my god, like 3 months. So I was
Mhm.
terrified of them. Like I'm never looking at these ever. And I was a really small channel at the time. I think I had like 1,000 subscribers. Um, and
Right.
turns out people I won't say like people really liked the theory or anything, and it wasn't like the video was full of praise, but like it was encouraging to see that people were interested in the possibilities. And I was like,
Mm.
oh, well, maybe I'll make another one. And then I made another one, and then I made another one, and now here I am.
And here you are,
So blame Dainsliff. It's all his fault.
the
Agreed
Twilight
accident.
Sword.
We call it happy accidents.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cipher.
So what do you love the most about Genshin lore?
Uh, hmm. I think when it comes to Genshin lore, the part that I like the most is the exposure that it gives me to things I never knew existed.
Mm.
Like,
Uh, well, like mostly other cultures, obscure legends, different interpretations of myths throughout. Like just being able to look at things from different perspectives, and I've been able to. I don't really want to say self-educate, but I guess that's
Mhm.
kind of what it is.
Well, mm.
I
Like
Like
see.
I
widen your
come
worldview a little bit.
Yeah, that's a better way to put it. It's like I mean, I'm from the US, and the US is pretty let's just say agnostic on the whole.
Yeah.
It's not a very spiritual place. It's not a very and we don't really have a long history unless you look at, Native American tribes, and that's a whole nother can of worms. Um
Yeah. I mean, we don't
but
even
like
learn about other cultures unless we go out of our way to do it, right?
Exactly. And so, one thing that Genshin's really done well, I think, is they've been able to take all of these really interesting aspects of other cultures, like from Japan and China and all across the Persian Empire, the Middle East, the Northern Africa, and Europe, and kind of like give a really interesting entry point into history and culture and mythology and religion, and make it digestible. And then they put it in the context of a video game. So you're actually interested in learning about it, right? Like
Mm.
when I was doing a deep dive into Wanderer, being able to find out that like you had to learn about Buddhism, Shintoism, and Taoism just to figure out what the hell a Shugenja monk was, like
Mhm.
that's a big deal, right? And then you figure Buddhism, when your only real point of reference, in terms of like schools of thought or philosophy, is kind of like Greek or Christian. It's
Mm.
a very eye-opening thing, because you're like, oh, I you start to understand some of the nuances between, like if you were to go read a manga after that, right? You start to understand a little bit of like, oh, this is why they write in this way. It's like because this is kind of how people have been brought up to think, and it's interesting to see that. And I really
Yeah.
love it. It really broadens your horizons. Something you
Yeah.
don't
Just
get from
Mhm.
many games at all.
definitely like
Now that I
there's a
think
lot of
about it,
creativity right in their writing team there with their um links to different cultures. Like we know that Genshin represents like within Genshin there's a bunch of cultures represented from all across the world. And I think what's really interesting about channels like yours is you really dive into the more nuanced areas of the lore that are, the extended lore that's like hidden behind the main story that's just around, like you said, the world building, and the learning that you can get from that, like is definitely something I think that people enjoy about your channel is that they can learn that and like how much like especially when you ramble on your on your videos when you're like I'm just gonna ramble and I'm just gonna talk about my thoughts like I think that that's great because it's you never it's always interesting to see like how far you can go when you try, right?
Yeah, and you can go far and you can
as,
get lost. You can get
as we've
really
seen.
lost. I know. Well, you've had people on this podcast, who have specialties kind of within Genshin. I think that's
Mm,
something else that's really cool, because like with other games, a lot of the lore enthusiasts and theorists, they all kind of overlap, and you'll get a slightly different perspective on a theory or a bit of lore within game or a character, or like interpretations and stuff like that. But you don't really have specialists, right?
mm,
Like I know you've had Tuna Fishy on here, and all about philosophy, especially right now. Like absolutely loves that kind of, it really specializes in it, and something that I just can't get into. I've
mm,
got lore friends who specialize only in looking for links between Genshin and the Kabbalah, right?
mm.
Uh so it's really fascinating to watch that, because it feels very real world archaeology. And I think
Right.
that's kind of the magic of it. Like, regardless of the plot or the story of Genshin, like the world building just so deep and so phenomenal, because they've done a really good job of incorporating and correctly linking all of these little bits and pieces of real world mythology in the game. And that's such a difficult thing to do. I've tried to do it before with fiction
Mm.
writing, and it's very, very hard.
Yeah, I think that just the fact that you can make a bunch of videos on it is a testament to how intricate it is. And I have
Yeah.
actually another I have another
I
question
love
for you, which
the,
is
I'm sorry.
oh, Cipher, you good?
Yeah, I was gonna say something. Sorry.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I love how they have incorporated so many unknown cultures and tidbits that we don't really talk about, like African cultures. I have learned so much
Hmm.
about these from like tweets from Genshin content creators and stuff, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, that's the other thing. It really stokes that feeling of discovery, right? And it's not just discovery of something cool in game. Like we didn't just,
Mhm.
stumble over a crazy new area that's like, oh, this is so pretty. It's like, oh, this is a real part of
Right.
history that's like forgotten. And I've
Right.
recently just stumbled on this whole thing of like um these well, I guess maybe that's a rabbit hole we probably shouldn't go down into right now. But like when you start researching and you realize that they're starting to reference pieces of history that were intentionally erased,
Mm,
like subcultures
Mm.
within subcultures within tiny sects from little
religions and things.
nomadic groups and like all these offshoots and everything. And when they start to reference that and they're just like, yeah, this is our core art, and then you realize like, oh, this original civilization here, it's all Greek, and you're like, well, why did they choose Greek? And you realize, well, it's because Genshin's based on Gnosticism, and Gnosticism has its roots in Greece. But then you start to look farther back, and they're actually going farther back than just, oh, we're at a start in Greece, and that's like the starting point, right? Like they're going farther back. They're going like
Right.
as far back as you can humanly go, like stuff that's
Yeah,
not
they're
even
using
properly
all the knowledge.
documented. It's wild. They have to have a staff of like full-time historians and anthropologists. They have
Yeah.
to. I don't know how
Yeah,
else.
and it takes us as a community, you know, anthropologists and historians to figure out just what these references are. So it's really cool to see the community come together
I
and
know
learn.
that's cool.
Yeah. So my question for you is, in regards to your, personal uh, love of lore content and Genshin, like, since you started creating this lore content, like you said, you started just making video after video after video, like, what's one big thing you've learned? Like, it can be about yourself, it can be about Genshin. I know we just talked about some stuff, but what's something else?
I mean, obviously I've learned a lot about
Yeah, like literally
actual
learned a lot about
yeah, I've
cultures.
literally learned a lot. Like I've even gone into like the radioactivity and,
Is there one big thing that stands out to you?
I honestly think like the biggest lessons in all of this have just been like from a content creator standpoint. Like those were the big lessons.
Mm,
Like, yep, I'm gonna take that. I'm gonna live every day with that. Like those have been the real lessons. Everything else is more like I'm putting this in my internal library.
mm,
Um, it's mostly been a content creator thing and kind of learning. This was more of an interpersonal thing. It's not exactly related to Genshin specifically. It's just like through Genshin, I've been able to experience interacting with literally hundreds of thousands of people on an almost daily basis.
mm,
Learning how to manage energy levels, learning how to relax, like when to relax, when to hyper focus, when to detach yourself from an idea, and when to I want to say like choose your battles.
mm.
Like you go to the comment section and it's gonna be a mess, right? Like some people are gonna be like, "Oh my god, this is so cool." Some people are gonna be like, "Well, actually," and then other people will be like, "Wait, but what did you do here?" And then other people will be like, "Oh, here's some information that might help you with this video," and then they rehash everything that's like in the video. You're just like, "Did you watch it?"
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
being able to control the emotional side of things and actually like detach yourself from what's going on and
Mhm.
on like the actual content side, that's been I think the biggest lesson, honestly.
kind of like as a content creator, right? Like as like maybe even
Yeah.
a tip for future aspiring content creators, like, learn to manage this, right? Because it really helped you out.
Yeah. And when it comes to creating content and putting yourself out there, like you have to have a really tough skin and you have to have a very specific mindset. And I get very worried sometimes when I see people come into this space and they're very, very sensitive
Mm-hmm.
because like the being so exposed
Mm-hmm.
is very difficult and very draining, and it can really wreck you. Even people who
Mm.
have like 10,000 followers on Twitter or something, and they post like 10 tweets, a month or something. Even that can be emotionally draining. But then you make video content or audio content, and people will like nitpick every aspect of your pronunciation and your voice,
Mm.
and oh my god, you sound so stupid, or like it's like it's being able to manage that and just being able to attach yourself, and it's a skill.
Well, that's
It
great. We
takes time to
appreciate
develop.
you. Like, we appreciate you, for going through that
Yeah,
and for bringing content to the community.
yeah, your content is great. Thank you for
Well,
sticking
thank
around.
you. Thank you. I mean, I'm having fun. Don't get me
Woo!
wrong, I'm having
That's
fun.
all that
Um,
matters.
Yeah.
I love learning. And so like this is kind of the perfect game and the perfect scenario for me to kind of indulge in a lot of you know, interests that I really wouldn't have had the incentive to fixate on otherwise.
Hmm.
Just a
And
game, they
share.
say. Thank you so much for answering. Josh, would you mind introducing the topics for today?
Sure. Yeah, so thank you for your introduction, Ashikai. Definitely looking forward to picking your brain a little bit about some of these
Yeah,
topics that we have prepared for you today.
yeah.
So we're going to talk about, of course, we have some topics, but it's, depending on which rabbit holes we go down, we may, you may swerve left and right here and there. But typically today we want to talk about the desert lore, right, and involving Sumeru and the desert, Eternal Oasis, all that good stuff. Very popular suggestion and requested topic to talk about. We're also planning to talk about the timeline of Genshin, any timeline alterations. I'm hoping to talk about Airman Soul a little bit. We'll talk about that, and we wanted to touch a little bit on the like nature of the non-human being characters in Genshin as well. We just talked about culture and people, like how a lot of their culture comes from our world culture, but where do the non-human beings tie into Genshin? In Genshin tie into the culture too. We want to talk a little bit about that because it's also an interesting requested topic. So, um, with that being said, let's get started on our first topic, which is the desert. So, Cipher.
Yep, that's how I
Oh,
feel about the desert
Cipher.
too.
Yes, yes. The answer is barren, like the desert of Hadramaveth. Yeah.
I'm
So,
just gonna bury myself in the sand.
okay. So let me start then. Ashkai, is there like any particular favorite lore you have of the desert? Is there like something you think is just like the most interesting, craziest thing to you?
Cyborg Jin
Jin.
as
Okay.
cyborgs.
Cyborg Jin.
Yeah, like that's half the desert lore. that's, that's
That's
kind
so
of
good.
like, oh man, the desert is like the one of my favorite rabbit holes because when I first got into the Genshin lore and you're trying to like learn about everything at a really high level, the
Hmm.
first thing that anyone finds out about is like the names of the gods, right? Like
Right.
Barbados and Morax. Like everyone learns about those first, and they're like, "Oh man, this is so cool! I wonder
Yeah.
where they're from." And everyone goes to the Ars Goetia, like the Lesser Key of
Right.
Solomon. Um, but the part that I really like about that is that the desert region made King Deshret into Solomon.
Yes.
And I love that so much. Um, his relationship with the Jinn is like similar to what King Solomon had with the demons and the Jinn, in the Testament of Solomon and so on,
Hmm.
which is also really fun. But they added a Jinn connection to the Queen of Sheba, who should be the goddess of flowers.
Right.
And then if you find out that the goddess of flowers was a sea, and then you realize that the Jinn came from her, like suddenly
Mm.
you have this hierarchy of angelic beings. And then the
Yes.
Jinn themselves were split into pieces. Like you could actually like split them into pieces and they were still cognizant. Like they're
Hmm.
still like conscious and they can function. But then you can also take them and you can insert them into machines. Like you can
Mm.
use fragments of them to power all of this ancient machinery. And a lot of the ancient machinery that we see in the desert is powered by jinns, like pieces of them, which kind of makes them like ghostly magic spirit cyborgs.
Mm.
Wow.
Yeah.
What
And then it
kind
makes
of
me wonder about like
machinery?
Enkanomiya because they have the same tech down there. Like, what's
Wow.
going on?
Wow. Isn't Enkanomiya like all the way over in Inazuma?
Yeah, yeah. But the architecture of
Crazy.
Enkanomiya extends all the way to the chasm, right, which is in Liwa. So like that whole area, that massive area of water between Inazuma and Liwa might have something under it,
You're right.
right?
Like it can't be that that water is pointless. There must be something, right?
Right, because like why else would
Like
Inazuma be like all the way just in the corner?
yeah, right. It does. It's not just a distance thing, right? Because Genshin is quite big, and like they don't put
Yeah.
useless distance somewhere like anywhere else.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah, that's crazy. Like, do you think any like abyss shenanigans are going down, like going on down there?
Abyss
Like
shenanigans is
Enkanomiya is
in.
underwater. Like, do you think there are any like other areas underwater like that?
Oh yeah, all over the place.
Huh?
Like anytime you see deep water, get suspicious.
Huh?
Like I don't remember who made the original theory. I'll have to find the thread. But I remember a while back seeing someone make this really interesting thread where they basically took pictures of the map and they said, look, all these dark areas in the water, this is where the water is the deepest, right? And then they were pointing out to be like, but if you go into like this tunnel and you're like underground and you follow it all the way around to this cave, look where you are. And that like the map marker is right underneath that deep part of water. And then you have things like the perpetual mechanical array, which is also underwater in like this underwater cave in this big dark zone. And so like
Hmm.
they went through this the whole map and they just like pointed out all of these places where like, hey, all these ancient ruins here are actually in these super deep parts of the water.
Dedication.
Yeah. So I definitely think there's something under the area between Enkanomiya and the chasm specifically. And and then like you can actually like date the technology in Enkanomiya, not really the chasm because the chasm doesn't have a whole lot of tech that you can find. There's a couple of things, like the upside down fountain. You could actually link that to the obelisks in the desert. Um, but like a lot of the like light based magic, like the door that you first open to like get into Enkanomiya, um, it looks just like all of Deshret's stuff. Like it has to be from the same era, or at least based on the same thing. And if he was using a lot of Jin based magic, I'm just like, so whose spirits are powering all of this stuff in Enka?
Yeah.
So far, Sumeria has more to do with the Abyss and Mondstadt, like unlike we thought in the past.
Mondstadt is interesting because it's one of the only regions that doesn't actually have how do I put this? So there's a difference between a legend, a myth, and a fairy tale.
Mm-hmm.
Primarily like a legend is usually something that's just like, oh, it could be true or it might not be true, right? And a myth, from like a religious standpoint, like, you know, if you have followers believing in a religion, and we kind of like put that all under a mythology kind of thing, um, heading. That's what I should call it. Uh, a myth is something that's usually taken to be at least somewhat true, at least in a metaphorical sense or whatnot. Whereas, like a fairy tale or a fable is meant to just teach a moral lesson and it's expected to not be true.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
One really interesting thing about Mondstadt is it's the only nation that I can find that, like, I can think of that only or at least predominantly references fairy tales and fables and not mythologies and not really like legends. Basically, everyone in Mondstadt is
Right.
referencing a fictional story. Like you've got Klee, who's Little Red Riding Hood. She's friends with the big bad wolf, which is Razor, right? You've got Diluc, who's like technically Batman. The Knights of
Batman,
Yes.
Favonius are
fairy
like,
tale.
yeah, I mean, like the Knights of Favonius are basically the Knights of the Round Table. You even have like a young King Arthur. There's a sword in the stone in the Dada Upa Gorge. You've got Parsley Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme, which is like the lyrics from Scarborough Fair, which was all about a legend of like an elf king who was kidnapping a woman. I won't go into that. But like it's interesting, right? Because like we had this whole thing in Sumeru about like Irminsul and then like fables and uh Irminsul can't affect fictional things because it doesn't recognize them as truth, so it doesn't need to update them because it's not real anyway.
Which is how she could sneak the story through of skirmish through there, right?
Right, yeah. So then you look at Mondstadt again from a very sussier angle, right? And you realize that the Mondstadt lore that we have currently compared to every other region is actually very shallow. Very shallow. And Venti's interesting because he tells all of his stories in not like a memory or like a recollection, but he tells them in fairy tales. There once was a boy, or you know, like once upon a time, or in a
Oh
land
yeah,
far, far away. Like
the battle pass.
he always does it that way, right? Yeah. Well, I'm even thinking about a story quest, which I just replayed through recently, on
Oh.
my second. So he when he was telling about his own story, he just like once there was a boy who wanted to see the sky, and then he met a wind spirit and all that kind of stuff. Like he never talks about him, I, me, my, or anything. He talks about everything in third person like it's a story.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then there's this really suspicious birthday art of Venti, which I feel like almost no one's seen because it happened during the original beta for the game. And it's a picture
Mm-hmm.
of Venti in his god form. And there's just like one hand offering him an apple.
Mm.
And then the little descriptor text is like, there's a whole world inside this apple. And it's like he goes on about it. And then
Oh,
you're
I
like,
see it.
okay, well, now we've got the Pale Princess and the Six Pygmies, which actually translates more literally into the Snow Princess and the Six Dwarves. And you're like, well,
Mm.
isn't that like Snow White and the Seven Dwarves? But like six, I don't know why it's six. And then that story has a poisoned apple in it that made her sleep forever, right?
Yeah.
You start and the Pale Princess was a book that we got in Mondstadt from Lisa, and Lisa said there's a big secret in it. The Abyss Order wanted that secret. She's the librarian. She keeps all of these fictional books safe. Like, so you start to like look at it that way, and Mondstadt becomes really suspicious, not in terms of the Abyss Order, but in terms of what's actually going on in
Aren't
Genshin.
you like trying to bury the lore and stuff? Like
You mean,
pretend it's not real
yeah, like that's
and
kind
hide
of
it
what I'm
too.
thinking. Like Venti created a nation of bards almost as like an archival system. Because songs that turn into legends, that turn into myths, that turn into fairy tales, that turn into like moral lessons, right? So like over time, they just kind of like naturally morph that way. And by putting them into song, Irminsul doesn't really do anything with them because they're just songs, they're just art, they're just
Oh,
poetry,
that,
they're just like a fictional
that's
thing.
so
Oh wow.
interesting. Yeah, because I remember like hearing. Oh, okay, I was like watching a video about a theory about how Zhongli has the traveler accompany him to record what's happening. I forgot what quest
Yeah.
it was, but yeah, like that's like because Zhongli is aware
Yep.
of of everything, and how to get information basically through this system that might be controlled by Irminsul and Celestia. And so like thinking about Venti and how smart he actually is, and how he has, like you said, built this nation of bards or this nation of fairy tales, to keep stories to be safe, to keep them safe from being erased from the timeline. That sounds really interesting to me.
Well, Zhongli is interesting. That exact thing you're talking about in his Havria quest.
Hmm.
So that's his first story quest. Yeah, that's the first one. Yeah, that's the
Right,
first
right,
one.
right.
He actually says that outright. He says, "I've been trying to record history, and originally I tried to put it on stone tablets, but stone
Right.
tablets erode with time." And then his second story quest was all about, finding the memories in stone. Ajdaha had the ability to like read the memories of stone. And then Zhongli calls us a witness multiple times. And then he even tells all of his adepti about it because later Zhao calls us a witness. And he says that it's because Zhongli told him that, like the traveler is the witness. We're supposed to see all of these things and record them because our memories will live on within them. So that's, you know, it seems to be an ongoing theme, especially when you then have Nahida, who's, the inner being like, yeah, so I put everyone's memory inside of this tiny little fairy tale about a cat. As a backup plan,
Oh.
why not?
And you know what makes me think about Inazuma? Like, what is every Archon doing to try to circumvent this like possibility of being erased by Irminsul? Like, I mean, Raiden Shogun A like tried to freeze her entire nation and like
Yeah.
create a whole pocket universe to just stay in to keep all of everything away from the rest of Teyvat. So
Yeah,
it
and it
just
makes me
makes
wonder
it
what
look sus.
Makoto was trying to do. Because like this was
Right.
A, and she was never really an Archon. So like if A
Right.
is doing this, then what was Makoto doing?
Woo.
Makoto straight up went to fight without communicating with A, even though she's less capable of fighting. What's up with that?
I don't know that she actually went to fight. Like
Yeah, she went to like
that's
Conria to fight. It's in her second story quest, I think.
she went to Conria, but it's never stated that she went to fight something.
Yeah, maybe she wasn't planning on fighting, but ended up being
Huh.
there, you know? Like we still don't know what
Like
happened 100%.
yeah,
Like so
there's
Mm.
currently no evidence that a war happened in Conria that like melted it down or like the Archons
Actually,
smited it or something. Like what we have right now is basically like the Archons could not ignore what was happening there. But that doesn't mean there was a war. It could have been like there could have been a disaster, like a nuclear meltdown. Oh, you can't ignore that, but it's also not a,
yeah.
not a combat situation sort of thing. So it's hard to say. It could have been a fight.
I wonder why she told Aid nothing.
Well, it was
If I
never
comment on
meant.
that, I'll get people really mad at me.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so interesting stuff.
Huh, so speaking of Conria, like the disease that turns people into hilichurls and like the Eliasa, they have similar symptoms. How could they be linked?
They made a whole video on that. Um,
Oh wow.
it's
Yeah, yeah, you did about the Marana, right?
really-
Um yeah, yeah.
I
So,
did. I'll give you the really TLDR of it. But the way I see it right now, I think about elemental energy in the sense of like radioactivity. And the reason I think
Hmm.
that is because Genshin puts a heavy emphasis on alchemy and real world alchemy, which is a thing because alchemy was like the precursors in chemistry and
right.
biology and a lot of physics. Um, they were really obsessed with the idea of transmuting one material into another. And in a lot of cases, it was like antimony or lead into gold, right? And you can actually do that because an element is defined by how many protons it has. So you knock off one, then you technically have a different element. But you have an unstable element, right?
Hmm.
Because the stability of an element is like how to like actually maintain its current properties. So if
Mhm.
you knock off, I think it's Oh, it's been a while. I think if you knock off, is it 2 protons from lead, you can get gold.
Oh, here we go.
But
This
you
is this
actually end up with
conversation.
like.
This is like that video you made with the colors where we just start talking about science for like 20 minutes.
Well, I'll get back to lore and why I'm putting it this way in a second. But like if you knock off those protons, you end up with gold, but the gold is radioactive because it's no longer stable. It has too many electrons, and so like it starts throwing off electrons, like trying to make itself stable again. And that's the radioactivity. That's a type of radioactive decay.
Hmm.
And eventually it will transmute itself back into lead because that's
Uh-huh.
where it's going to reach stability again. So
So,
that was kind of like what alchemy was about. And if you look at sort of the effects of radioactivity on the human body and stuff,
hmm
you can easily realize that like the Elazar and the symptoms and things like that they were going through, a lot of them are very similar to like overexposure to radiation. If you look at the withering zones, you'll realize that they're not actually withering in terms of like, they're losing all of their
like
water and the plants are
losing
drying up.
energy. Right,
They're
right.
they're actually overloaded. If you look into the like descriptions and stuff of everything, you'll realize that like all these plants and everything, they're overloaded. They have tumors, like cancerous tumors, which is something that you can get from overexposure to different types of radiation, right?
Right.
Um, if you think about that as like the ley lines are bleeding, and in that section, like there's just too much, and like everything's kind of absorbed it's creating these like cancerous tumors, and it's making everything unstable, and that's why it's like sapping your life energy because like your
Hmm.
body can't handle it. You can only be exposed to it for so long.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically like the withering, and then Elazar is the effect of withering on the body. But like the ley lines aren't bleeding into your body, so like it's actually slowly just deteriorating your flesh and stuff like that.
Decaying.
So where does like the
The hilichurls are similar.
the oh, sorry.
Like mutations?
Yeah, like a mutation.
Well, I was curious, like, where does the deletion of Rukkhadevata from Irminsul causing to get rid of Elazar, like, where does that come in?
That one's annoying because it's difficult to explain, and I will try my best. The way I understood it, if it's the correct way, I don't know. But the way I understood it was that like Rukkhadevata was infected with forbidden knowledge. And I don't actually like the fact that it's called forbidden knowledge because the more you look at it, the more you realize it's not actually like something that you know. It's
Mm,
more like abyssal mud. Like, I don't think you could just talk to somebody and then suddenly they have forbidden knowledge. Like, you have to be
interesting.
exposed to it, right? Like, you have to be seeped in it somehow. And
Is it
Rukkhadevata had been
something?
exposed to this forbidden knowledge or this abyssal mud, as I'm going to call it. And because she's like literally connected to Irminsul, like she's infecting it. Like um she's got this like direct channel of toxic waste that's going into Irminsul and she can't sever her own connection. And then that kind of spirals out because Irminsul is connected to the ley lines, and the ley lines are connected to the land, and people eat, and all of this kind, like people are connected to the land because that's how they
Right.
survive. So that's
And
kind of
just
how I
people
understood it.
affects people randomly according to their like body composition or something like that.
I thought about it more like that. Yeah, deleted her, like basically the toxic waste flow stopped.
Right.
And so it kind of like removed the toxicity from everyone else. It was kind of like a cleanse, so to speak.
Mm.
Um, but it's still kind of annoying because it was like instant.
Yeah, exactly, right? It was like as if it was almost as if her and the memory of her who within Irminsul is connected to certain people who have Elazar, and like once you erase that, you instantly erase the Elazar, which like kind of makes it harder to piece those to put those pieces together, I think. So,
And
uh
it doesn't really make sense any other way,
right.
because like because the Elazar appeared when Deshret released the forbidden blood all over the desert, right? Like that's when it started. And then Rukkhadevata created these big cleansing towers that cleansed everything. But at that point, she hadn't been infected, just Deshret did.
And people seem to just be like kind of born with Elazar, isn't that right?
Right. Yeah.
Like Kale or
Um,
what's her name who we thought died but didn't die,
Junior Zod.
um, Denyerzad, yes. And yeah, so it's something I think we have to keep an eye on, especially when anything that relates to Irmin's soul and the sickness.
I think her
Yeah.
parents are fine, so I don't think it's hereditary.
Yeah, it's not hereditary, but it's like you're still born with it.
Is it
Yeah,
like
like
fate
like
or
Kale's
the
parents and Denyerzad's parents didn't have, as far, well, we don't know about Kale's parents, but like
No,
Denyerzad's
we do know
parents
about Kale's
didn't have.
parents. She didn't have them.
Oh, okay. So then, yeah, because they sent them to her to Mondstadt, right? Or like they gave her
yeah,
to
it was in the manga.
Dottore.
They gave her to Dottore.
Right, right. They're like, here you go, fix her. But
Yeah.
instead he made her a god. Okay, so anyway, the the oh, so Cipher, what were you saying?
Uh, you know how Seelies cure decay? Like, we could say warming Seelies radiate heat, so they reduce the effects of the cold. But why do the Seelies of life reduce the effects of decay? What powers do Seelies have? Are they elemental beings?
Okay, well, that's theory territory. So the Seelie ghosts that we see in games want to help humans. And so they actually go through documented mutations depending on the area that they're in. And they end up performing the opposite mutation of the area that they're in. So in the chasm, for example, you get light Seelies because the chasm is dark. Those are also cleansing Seelies. They'll cleanse the dark mud.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
But then, like in Dragonspine, it's cold, so you get warming Seelies, which help humans survive. So, like every adaptation that a Seelie has something to do with assisting the humans in the area that they're in, except Electro Seelies because they're weird. Electro
Are they
Seelies are just
elemental beings?
annoying. Um, the Dendro Seelies, the anti-withering ones, you could say that they're probably absorbing or like helping to stabilize the withering zones, right?
Yeah,
So if you have
like,
all of these radioactive particles floating around in the air, if they're able to block that out,
mhm,
like as in like an insulator, that's kind of how I think about it.
I see. Why do candles of life have the same property?
Probably the same thing, same reason. I mean, we've still got we've got warming pillars in Dragonspine. We have the light pillars in the chasm. Like that's kind of why I said it's interesting that like there's all of those Jinn powering these very similar looking robots and machines in the desert because everywhere we see Seelies with unique properties, we also see some sort of machine with the same properties.
Uh-huh. Well, what kind of powers do Seelies really have? Like, where does it originate from?
That depends on what you think Seelies are.
Then what are they? What do you think?
In my opinion, um, I think if the primordial one is supposed to be analogous to a god for a Gnostic Genshin, then Seelies are just angels, which makes them
Ooh.
like pseudo elemental beings because they would have been born of a god of light. And the reason why I say that is because if you look at like one giant being, some big primordial light god, and it has a whole race of children. You call them the Seelies. And then one of them gets cast out of heaven and survives this giant cataclysm and then creates another subspecies of Jinn. You can actually look at the Jinn to see traits of the Seelie.
Ah, I
And
see.
then you can actually link the Jinn to obviously the Jinn of um, Islamic uh, origin, right? And then those Jinn are different from angels in the same scriptures, but like they're related ish. They're not as human, but they're not uh, as divine either.
Speaking of Jin, I have this like I have this like thing where I'm notorious in my community for not being a huge fan of Dory as a character. So I haven't looked up her lore exactly, but you know,
You should. It's interesting.
yeah, because like it just reminds me that like she uses a djinn to like fight.
It's
Um,
so
Yes and no.
okay, so can you tell me about that?
Dory's weird.
I mean, I know that. That's why I don't like her. So no, I just actually like to be honest, like her voice for me, like, because I play in Japanese and like I speak Japanese and like
oh
her
my
her
God.
her voice is very like uh it's up there on like
Oh.
list of people I don't want
That's
to talk to in real life. So
Oh,
so
you have
like
to listen to the
ideal.
song too. I'm sorry.
yeah. So but what can you tell me about Dory and the Jinn that we know so far?
Dory's interesting because she, if you ascend her, she'll actually each ascension she'll tell you a story, um,
Hmm.
or part of a story, about how she kind of became the merchant she is today. And she starts off by saying she found this genie in a bottle, and that genie, if you extrapolate it out, you'll realize that that genie is Alice, because she has a daughter named Clee, and she she
What?
supplies Dory with all of her fancy machinery and oddities and inventions and bizarre
Mm
things that
mm
Dory then later sells, right?
mm
But like the story is about how Dory met Alice as a genie in a bottle, and she
mm.
released the genie from the bottle, and like it's this whole thing. And then the little plush pink thing that she fights with, I
Mm.
don't actually think is a Jinn or a genie. It seems to be a fog dev, which is a little different.
What
Um,
is that?
Yeah.
it's like another supernatural type of creature. It's not exactly a Jinn, but it's like adjacent. And I think the reason why there's a
Jinn
the
adjacent.
distinction, yeah, I think there's a reason why there's a distinction is to separate them from like Shirin and Lilipar and stuff.
Hmm.
Um, I think that's why there's the distinction here,
I
because
see.
I think in some interpretations they can be pretty similar. But the fog dev thinks it should be the same as a Jinn.
I
It
see.
thinks that it should be the same species as a Jinn, and so like it kind of behaves a little like how you would think one would in a slightly stereotypical manner. But it's not actually a Jinn insofar as I can tell. It shares no other similarities with the race as we know it.
Goodness
Like zero.
gracious. Okay, I have to look this up because
But Dory's lore is actually really, yeah, like they said, they're really dark. It's actually pretty dark.
oh yeah. Okay, well, um, definitely think about looking into it. I'll think about it. So, but I will
I mean,
eventually.
you don't have
So
to listen to it, just read it.
true, true, true. Um,
At least okay, at least read her ascension lines about the story about Alice. At least read that.
yeah. I mean, I'm super interested in Alice, and Klee and Albedo and that the whole jive with the magicians and the, it's really cool. Oh, that reminds me. By the way, do you have a favorite character in Genshin? Like whether it's lore wise or gameplay wise or whatever what have you, do you have besides, I mean, I'm assuming I have an idea, but like, do you have
Yeah,
one?
no, my favorite is Scaramouche by a long mile.
That's why you made a 40-minute or like 3 40-minute videos about him, right?
I've made a lot of videos.
Do you
That's
have
the
a
other
least
thing.
favorite?
I only Oh, do I have a least favorite?
Yeah.
Child and Dory are probably on the same level for me.
Child and Dory. Oh, okay, so
I don't like
we're friends
Child.
in that aspect.
I don't like Child. Yeah, I'm heavily biased. I'm
Oh.
heavily biased. I wouldn't say anything bad about anybody who likes him or, talk
Mm.
bad about him outside of like a very joking manner, but like personally he is not to my taste.
言いたいから我慢しろよ.
Yeah, no, no,
uh,
no, no, I'm good.
so then so speaking of Jin, etc., how about like linking this to the Eternal Oasis and the story of the Golden Slumber, Dirge of Bilqis, her foes wage something or evil. I don't remember what it's called, but like this Jet story, right? Um,
Yeah.
so lot of information there. Like, is there anything from Jet's story that um stood out to you that was like really interesting lore for you?
Mm, I mean, yeah. Like in
Yeah,
relation to just Jet, or like in relation to everything that we learned on those, because
just
that's
everything we
Golden
learned. Everything we
Slumber
learned.
all the way up to the Dirge of Bilquis. Like
Yeah,
that's a lot. Like
it's a lot,
it's quite literally the entire history of what happened in the desert.
right? Like
Uh,
considering
so
Gurabad, Lillipor, and all
well,
this stuff,
even prior to that, because like the Eternal Oasis, the Golden Slumber, like that's like
right?
the fall of King Deshret. You
Mm-hmm.
know, the Jinn themselves are a race that are kind of what brought Deshret and I guess we can call her the goddess of flowers or Bilqis together.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So like that's like it's it's the equivalent of like learning about Zhongli and Guizhong's relationship, but like through the most tragic and messed up means possible.
Yeah.
Right? Like we learned about Guizhong and Zhongli in a pretty wholesome way. All
No,
things
it was
considered.
pretty nice. It was pretty nice, especially like if you did, because like for me it was literally like I did that quest and then I did the Lantern Rite quest right after, and I was like, oh
That
wow,
is so
this is very
jarring.
refreshing. It's like it's really
So
easy to
jarring.
digest. You know what I mean? Like, um,
That's so jarring. You have like this happy little like cheerful inventor girl, and then like you go to the desert. Uh-huh. Yeah, yep.
yeah. Oh, by the way, I murdered everyone and made my kids murder each other, and like all this
Yeah,
stuff.
because
So,
I was mad because I am Tinkerbell and can only hold one emotion in my soul at any one time.
oh my gosh, Tinkerbell's such a good. Like if Tinkerbell could
Lilithar
talk,
is
she
just
would be
Tinkerbell to me.
Lillipar. If
Yeah,
Tinkerbell
because
could
like
talk,
that. Yeah, that's to me. Yeah, maybe not quite as racist.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
maybe, but we don't
Wow.
know. We don't know because she can't talk. So,
yeah, she can
old
make little
Disney
angry
films.
bell noises.
Oh yeah. Oh man, that'd be great. So
Uh,
and
yeah.
yeah, oh yeah. So do you want to say something?
I don't know that I have anything to add. Like, I don't know how many people here have actually like finished that quest to the point where like I could go really granular. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I think we would need a whole like podcast episode to talk about. Um,
honestly,
yeah, like maybe three. Like I don't. We would need a podcast episode for each section of that quest, and it would be
honest,
very
yeah,
long
it
because
would be very
there's
long.
so much. There's so much not only to like appreciate about it, but just to like deep dive into and like start connecting all of the different pieces of the desert to the story and how they're related. Um, yeah,
I'm gonna
it's.
have a hell of a time doing the recap video for that.
I'm
I thought Aran
excited,
Yako was difficult. I'm looking at this going like, yeah, okay, listen, Aran Yako was like convoluted because they all speak in riddles,
right?
but there still wasn't like a whole lot of information that was actually given. It was still pretty basic.
Mm-hmm.
This is the opposite. This is like
There's
not
so much
spoken in riddles at all,
information.
but it's just like
Yeah,
a ton of stuff. Like, oh my god. And I don't even think we're not even done. Like that's the thing. We're not even done.
yeah. I think there's
Yeah.
more. I mean, we have so actually speaking of the desert, I wanted to talk about really quickly, um, the like your theories for like Orochi and like Apep and like the Lost Hermitage area that's like all the way at the top, the big light tunnel at the top of the desert.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
yeah, like do you have any theories about that, like working theories that you're currently like working on for that?
Not that I'm currently working on. Um, I think it's I have some food for thought
Mm,
because like they put one of those consecrated beasts next to Orobashi and Inazuma, right?
yes. Mm-hmm.
And the lore behind those beasts is that they were basically normal animals, like the normal
Mm-hmm.
scorpions and the normal little floating snake things. Um,
The flying serpents.
but then yeah, those. But then they ate the flesh of gods. and
Yeah.
their bodies couldn't handle it, and so it like produces this hard outer shell and gives them all this additional powers and potentially longevity and things like that.
Right.
I think that's quite interesting because not only is there a consecrated beast in Inazuma, but there are crystal marrow cards in the
Yes.
desert, which makes you think about the whole thing at Tatarasuna again with the jade steel that Dottore kind of like helped finalize, I
Mm-hmm.
guess is a good way to put it. Because he
Like the Fatui had a hand in like moving this stuff around.
no, not that. You know how Dottore injected Kale with Archon residue, right? And it gave her
Right.
like he basically did what the consecrated beasts did. He just didn't make her eat it. He just injected her with a distilled form of whatever these gods have, right? And it
Right.
really twisted her and gave her all these extra powers and a snake god inside of it and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And then you notice that the crystal marrow has this weird thing where it grows from the corpse of the dead god, which makes you wonder if the consecrated beasts are actually also eating crystal marrow. But the crystal marrow is used in the production of jade steel. And
Mm.
jade steel is the steel that's used for the Raiden Gokuden's forging.
Mm-hmm.
All of these really fancy swords and stuff like that. But it also like basically destroyed the island of Tatarasuna. It basically created a nuclear meltdown, right?
Mm.
That Scaramouche almost lost his life shutting down that furnace. But
Right.
that was
Exactly.
all at the direction of Dottore, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you connect the jade steel to Kale, and you realize that he's basically taking the parts of dead gods and putting them into weapons, putting them into puppets, putting them into humans, right?
Mm.
And then we look back at the desert and we're like, oh, hey, the Jinn are basically gods of sorts, right? Because the goddess of
Mm-hmm.
flowers was a Seelie, right?
Right.
So if a Seelie can be a god, then there's no reason why a Jinn couldn't be a god. Like the whole thing about godhood seems to just be
Mhm.
like tied to worship. That's another discussion we'll probably talk about later. But
You're right.
if a Jinn is at least god-like, even if they are not a god, like they're inside of machines, right? And then all of the Eremites use this technology that they don't necessarily make themselves, but they've salvaged from previous civilizations. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
wondering if those previous civilizations and stuff are actually doing what Dottore was trying to do at Tatarasuda and taking the crystal marrow and creating a type of jade steel to create those bolt and elemental axes and bows and claw daggers, like, right?
Mm-hmm.
So instead of having animals eat it and gain all these extra powers, like why not harvest the material and create weapons that utilize all of this elemental energy? So like anyone, even if they don't have a vision, can do something like that. And then that brings to mind like all of the Fatui and the Animo boxers and stuff like that, right? Aren't
Mm-hmm.
those kind of similar to the Eremites in like their magic is tied to their weaponry and it kind of screws them up? Like they hide their eyes the same way the Eremites do, like all of that kind of stuff. Like there's little bits there. Like I don't really have like a fully fledged theory. That's my food for thought.
Okay. Well, appreciate that. Hopefully we learn more about it. Hopefully in one of your videos, once we get more information through the game itself, and the more that we learn through research, shared research with each other in the community, I think
Yeah.
it'll be really exciting. So
Mhm.
we will actually be going into like a 10-minute intermission right now. So if you need to take a break, have a drink of water, you two,
I'll do the
Ashkai,
informations.
we can get that started. Cipher, you have any last things to say?
Um, go do your daily commissions. See you soon.
Do your daily commissions. Okay, so I guess we'll break for intermission now,
Mhm.
and we'll see you
Yay.
all in about 10 minutes.
All right, we're back, folks. Welcome back. We actually meant 5 minutes, but we said 10 minutes. We're sorry about that. So let's talk some more about Genshin lore. Ashikai,
Yes, hi.
let's talk about domains. In the video, you mentioned
Oh.
that domains could all be bubble dimensions with different laws of space and time. Could you elaborate on that one?
um, how do I put it? How do
Nervous
I
laughter.
put it? I mean, it's basically just that. Like, I think that like a lot of domains are really just like spaces that have their own unique laws, so to speak, in terms of time and space and relativity and like so Genshin itself has its own unique set of laws. I'm sure most people have seen that loading screen at least once. Hello, Fluffy. Um, I have a little fluffy guest who wanted to participate. Sorry. Um, and then I lost my train of
Cacti.
thought because he's very distracting. Um,
Space time.
it's a dog
Wibbly
tax,
wobbly,
but
timey wimey stuff.
when you have a 50-pound dog climb up on your lap, you kind of have to pay attention. Um,
A
yeah,
50
dog
so
pounds.
tax, please. Tax.
the way I see it, Tevat itself it has like its own sense of time, and that's governed by one specific set of laws. And then any domain that exists to that, like outside of that bubble, doesn't follow the same logic. Like it's not technically on the same timeline. I think of it like if you have a timeline as a string, like time if it's a string and then Tevat is like a bead on the string, you can have lots of other strings with beads that are hanging around that one Tevat bead, and they could click and touch the big Tevat bead, but they wouldn't ever really be on the same timeline because they're hanging on different strings, if that makes sense. No, they exist in other spaces.
Cipher.
Hmm. Does this have something to do with time flowing faster in Abyss for a child but slower in Kanamiya?
Yeah, the whole thing about time is that it kind of requires an observer in order to function, right? So one thing that
Right.
we learned in the chasm is that time is relative. It's not absolute, or at least in
Mm-hmm.
domains, time is relative and not absolute. In Tevat, it's possible that time is actually absolute. So in the chasm in the perilous trail quest we realized that every single character in that quest perceived a different amount of time to have passed. Like some thought it was a
Right.
week, some thought it was like a day, some thought it was like, oh my god, we've been down here for like a month, right?
Paimon.
um and it's because all of them were technically witnessing relative time but not absolute time, because there is no absolute time in those spaces. They're too unstable and chaotic and they keep shifting and changing. They're not like anchored anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
which makes you wonder if there's like one big witness, so to speak, for to that's kind of keeping time steady. And a lot of times we think of that as like the god of time. If you look
Mm.
at A's second story quest with her realm of euthymia and then the realm of consciousness, like the realm of euthymia is weird because it seems to kind of just be what's inside of her head, but she's like still within Tivat, so she's still following absolute time. Like time
Mm-hmm.
passes what appears to be somewhat normally in there. Whereas in the realm of consciousness, which exists in a chaotic space that's like specific coordinates in order to get to, time moves both forward and backwards. Because like 500 years pass in that chaotic space, but like an hour passed in Tivat.
Right. They fought for 500 years, right?
Right. And the thing about space time is like you can't actually have time without space or space without time necessarily, because like
Mm-hmm.
you measure them according to each other. Like a distance traveled is like a distance traveled over what period of time. The amount of time that passes is like the amount of time that you're moving through space, right? So like they're kind of relative to each other. So without one, you can't have the other. So if you move the realm of consciousness into a space that has like no fixed rules or fixed meaning, like time is going to move in those same things. Like if a domain or a bubble universe is moving in this big giant chaotic space out in the middle of God knows where, and it just keeps going zip 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 all over the place, then time kind of follows that, and it goes all crazy. Sorry, that's like a weird physics thing. I'm not a physicist. I'm not particularly good at explaining that level of stuff.
No problem.
But that's how I think about it with the chaotic spaces. Um,
And what do you think? Like so, so the in the story right now, like I know you just mentioned that like the god of time is like constantly observing, um, time, and that because of this perception, it might be why time passes the way it does. But what about what do you think at this point? The god of time. I know I saw your video. I saw your your 3-part, maybe soon to be 4-part video about
we'll get there.
I mean theories, right, about everything and the
Yeah.
god of time and stuff. But I'm curious like what you think the this role in Genshin is right now.
You mean what the God of Time's role in Genshin is?
Yeah, is there something that is specifically the way it is because the god of time? I mean, I guess like Istaroth, right? And
Mm-hmm.
like Istaroth taught Enkanomian people how to make the sun dial things. I forgot what they're called, the Helios or something.
Yep.
Um, and so, do you think that the God of Time has played another direct role in any of the nations above the surface?
Um. Yes, because they were worshipped in Mondstadt,
Right, right, right. Wind and time.
and
Hmm.
then it's quite possible that she's the statue of the omnipresent God.
Can you elaborate a little bit?
Well, I mean, omnipresent means always present, present everywhere.
Hmm.
What's present everywhere all the time? Well, it's time.
Interesting.
And the thing is that statue wasn't constructed there. It's made out of a stone that's not found anywhere in Inazuma. It's not even made out of a stone that's found in Enkanomiya. Um, and it's got the symbol of what I've linked to Celestia, the Homa symbol with its wings on the back.
Right.
Um,
About the bird. Right.
yeah.
That's the one
So
that you linked to the Staff of Homa and uh
and yeah,
Rook. What is it?
Rick
The
Nevada.
bird? Yeah, like
Oh,
the spelling is similar, but it's like just the phoenix,
you mean the rook bird, the rock bird.
the rock bird. Yeah,
Um,
rock and roll bird.
yeah, that one's a little bit different. In this case, there's actually called a Homa. It's called the Huma or the Homa bird. Um,
Oh, okay.
in Guizhong, yeah, in Guizhong too. Celestia in general seems to be very bird themed. The Abyss seems to be very snake, dragon, bishop themed. That should sound familiar. The whole plot of Genshin is just snake versus bird at this point. But like
TLDR,
birds
snake
have
versus
wings.
bird.
Birds have wings. Angels have wings. It makes sense to kind of like think of it that way. Um, but let's see. The actual role of the god of time, I think, is to like help regulate the world. The I have to back up a little bit. Um so at the very beginning of the game, like when you first started up, you meet the sustainer of heavenly principles, right?
Hmm.
And anyone who's played Honkai Impact will immediately tell you, "Oh, that's Kiana, the sustainer of the void from Honkai Impact," right?
Right.
Yeah.
And it could be. It's definitely referencing the
Yeah,
sustainer of or the Hersher of the void. Like for sure,
the
100%
Hersher. Yeah.
referencing that. And you don't need to know what a Hersher is. You don't need to know anything about that in order to understand what I'm going to say. I'm just using that to point out like a recurring theme in Hoyo's writing.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but void is actually a little bit misleading because void, the characters used in Chinese actually means space.
Mm-hmm.
So she's technically the Hersher of space.
Hmm.
And
Mm.
so if you think about it this way, if the sustainer of heavenly principles is referencing the Hersher of space, and then we have a god of time, and the god of time is a shade of the primordial one who should be God, then the sustainer of space, I guess in this case, should also be a shade of the primordial one, theoretically, and should also be like the god of space. So you got the god of space and the god of time. Um, and what are they doing? They're upholding the heavenly principles, so like the rules of the world, the laws of the universe kind of thing. But Tavad is very sheltered. It's very like contained. So it's quite
Mm-hmm.
possible that they're operating at a level that's like very high in terms of reality.
Right.
So
And Dainsleff
I
is trying to get above that, right?
I mean he's trying to. Oh, that's a whole nother thing. I think Dainsleff is just trying to break free of the shackles of the world because like humans are technically trapped into that. They're not allowed to leave like they leave. The twins are like, oh, we're gonna leave now, and Susty's like, oh no, you aren't. You're stuck here now. You came into my world. You stay in my world. Good luck leaving.
Um.
Right.
Um, so like nothing, things can come in, but nothing can come out. Is basically the way it is. And I don't even think she wants things to be able to come in. She just like if they happens, it happens. Um,
Well, I really like it's like I like that you bring up the translation because for me, like I studied Japanese language in school, and so Japanese shares a lot of language with Chinese, and they
mm-hmm.
use a lot of the same characters, including Genshin. Like the characters for the name of the game are the
Like.
same, and which means original god, which is like
Yep.
which we kind of translate to primordial god. And so seeing a lot of these, I think someone in the chat said like the English they translate it, they localize it to be more poetic, but actually it becomes harder to for us to grasp the meaning without sifting through a bunch of different cultures and
Dang.
and words and cultures and meanings. When in Chinese and in Japanese, it's actually just way more simple, because concepts that are presented are it's not a word where you have to learn about the meaning of it. It's like a symbol. It's a pictology, like it has, or it's a pictorial language. So you have the picture that means
Yeah.
us. It has meaning, and so I think that it's really interesting for us to even just saying the name Genshin, like it means nothing to us. It means this game, but
Mm-hmm.
Genshin is like that has meaning in itself. And so like when we think about that, I really like the theory of the travelers being the original uh being like originally from Tevat and actually originally in line to ascend to the throne, and then the Celestia outsiders, the aliens so to speak, which may or may not be tied to like Honkai universal space travel time stuff, um kind of usurp the throne, and like our job is to try to get back, or like there's just like all these like interesting theories about that. Do you have like a any thoughts about that? Like like interesting uh comments about something you're currently thinking about in regards to that part of the lore and the primordial one, and like where the traveler's role in it is,
That
that you can
is the
share?
whole part 4 of my God of Time series.
All right, so can you just read the
um,
script for that video right now? I'm just kidding.
I
So
don't have it written. I don't have it completely written yet. I have my notes down
Three
on
of
it.
three.
Huh?
Didn't it say part 3 of 3?
yeah, but she said in the video there's going to be a part 4. So
Well, yeah. So when I originally wrote the script for it, then things happened in game, and I had to write another part to it. Um, so like the part 4 is technically the original part 3, but I had to add the current part 3 in order for anyway. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Three. It's a rule of 3, but it's actually 4. You know, like that's the thing. The thing is with the not to detract because I will come back to this, but the thing about the localization and the translation is actually it goes both ways because I distinctly remember the CN community being really upset that the English community knew about the Gnostic ties way before they did.
Ah, that's interesting.
'Cause
I never even thought
they
about
didn't
that.
have things like gnosis. They didn't have the word gnosis. They didn't have Gnostic hymn. They didn't have like those little things. They didn't have
Mm,
those in Chinese. They're different.
yeah,
They're
because
different.
because the lore is sourced from other cultures outside of China, then they don't actually have those things. Like we can look them
Yeah.
up, right? But like they can't. Like they have to like learn the other
Yeah.
languages to just
And
understand it.
the biggest issue with localization, I don't even think is necessarily making the language poetic. I think it's the fact that the localizers um don't know where the writers are actually going. Like the writers who write the original Chinese, they know exactly where they're going. They know where to foreshadow. They know where to use really specific characters to hint at something, like how
Right.
they're hinting at Guizhong being a phoenix because they've actually referenced her name and her title using characters that mean from the ashes we reborn kind of thing. Like how they do things like that.
Mm-hmm.
They know all of those things, but like the localizers don't have context. Like even if they were really hardcore into the lore, they don't have enough text, I think, to understand where it's going to go in the future, which is why harbingers like Arlecchino completely got misgendered, right?
Right.
Why the Dendo Archon was just defaulted to be male, while Daughter was thought to be male originally. Like Gold was going to be a male alchemist. Like those weren't retcons. Like those were things that like our localizers just didn't know because the genders are never specified, so they just guess.
Right.
And I think that happens a lot, like a lot. Because like even
That's
names change. Like Kazari isn't Kazari anymore. She's like Hachi. What is her new name?
Kazari.
Yeah, Sacred Sakura, the Saigyu ghost.
The, the cleansing girl.
Hachimitsu, I forget. Something flower
Ha-
blossom.
Asia?
Hachimitsu means honey.
Does it,
uh,
does it have something to do with different pronunciations of kanji?
There's
um,
there's that too though, like because they can be read a lot of different ways.
right. And there's Hanachiru Sato.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Sorry, I pushed the name in my
No, no,
brain.
no, no problem, no problem. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
but originally she
yeah.
was Kazari, right? And like even
Right.
some of the Iwakuras have been renamed.
Mm,
Um, so like there's a lot of stuff like that, and I think it's really important that we check across things like child's transformation is the foul legacy transformation in English, but it's actually demon armament
mm,
um, in Chinese, right? And if you look at
jeez.
like demons, we look at demon gods, we look at, the archons, and we
So,
realize,
so
oh, anyway.
for us to pull as much information as we can from the current game, like the game the way it is right now, is our like we have to kind of look everywhere then because
Yeah,
because it's not streamlined enough to like
that's
for the
been a challenge.
foreshadowing. Yeah, that's so interesting.
It's
Oh man.
cool though because like I have you can debate ethics about this, but there are some people who, for some reason, think it's really cool to take my videos and then put them on Bilibili, and
Oh,
I don't mind because I have no ability to do anything on Bilibili. And
right.
they translate the whole thing into Chinese,
I
right?
see.
And so there's like a whole community there of people who watch my videos and comment in Chinese.
Okay, that's so
And
cool.
there have since been some people from Bilibili who've realized that, oh no, these videos come from YouTube, and so they'll come over to YouTube and they'll write their comments in Chinese, and I have to translate them to read them. But they basically like go and they summarize all of the additional information that some of the Bilibili viewers had,
Interesting.
and
So
Okay, but
they'll
that's
that's
a
put that in there.
wow.
cool.
So I get a
Yeah.
lot of interesting additional stuff in there, like even just cultural stuff. Like, for example, Candace, right?
Mm,
Um,
love Candace.
CN community is convinced that her name is not Kendake. and it is
Oh,
Candace. And they made a really strong case for it, but it's a case that's really difficult to encourage like to support in English only. Like you
right.
have to understand like the pinyin and um like the historical references that China is uh that the China's the Chinese community is trying to get across, and that's very difficult to do. Um but yeah, so it's fascinating to learn that and to get the different perspectives. Like for example, in the CN community,
Hmm.
basically they've been saying that Zhongli is a descender and he might actually be a primordial god or whatnot. And they've been saying that for ages because of like the characters that he uses, the way he talks, a lot of
Right.
the cultural references that he's getting that like no one outside of mainland China is really gonna get, right?
Interesting. Right. So then we can look at their
So
theories and think like,
and
how does it hold up?
it's only now, like after Sumeru, that like the rest of the world is kind of catching up to that. And they're just like, oh my God, have you heard this theory that Zhongli is so? I'm like, yeah, it's been on CN for like since 1.1.
Wow.
It's like there's all
Wow.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Uh
but that's so interesting.
okay, so I really was going somewhere with the whole um connected multiverse whatever thing.
Hmm.
I forgot the original question, but I remember the general direction. My hint for that video is aliens
Aliens.
in like the most History Channel way possible. Aliens. I'm not saying it was the
Aliens.
aliens, but it was the aliens.
Yeah.
And I can actually tie it to some biblical stuff, which is fun because
Interesting.
I actually do 100% think we're going ancient astronaut.
I love that.
100% think Genshin is going ancient astronaut. And I will also say that I don't necessarily think that the takeaway from that should be that Genshin and Hoyo are saying, oh, humans didn't build the pyramids, aliens built the pyramids, or anything like that. They're not. One of the reasons why I think they have such an interesting mix of cultures and the way that they've mixed them is because the world of Tevat appears to kind of be like a backup world, like built on data
Right.
from previous cultures, previous civilizations, and then just kind of like it's kind of like taking the same ingredients and then putting them into a different recipe.
Hmm.
Like it's still made up of the same building blocks, but it tastes different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Right.
that's kind of
I
how that is compared to our Earth, in my opinion. But like the reason why it happened into that, in my opinion, is also because of ancient aliens.
and do you think the
Ancient
aliens? Oh, actually, I
aliens.
guess it's in your video. I don't want to. I don't want to
You can ask
get too
questions. It's
deep.
okay.
No, I just like I love. So I'm not done with it because I started playing it after Genshin, but I am working my way through Honkai Third, and I just got and I've been playing the beta for Honkai Star Rail,
Mhm.
and like the similarities are way obvious, right? Like between
Yep.
like they have the same characters. They have
Oh,
Kokolia, Bronya, like
yep.
Himeko, like they have all these people, and but it's a totally different universe, so to speak.
Mhm.
And playing Honkai, there's like pocket universes, alternate realities, like they're all connected. Even like I think Dvalin and Tevat were referenced in Honkai,
Yeah,
to some
we
degree.
have Honkai
Yep.
characters in Genshin like Yae, Raiden,
I mean, yeah,
Alhaiten.
so right, those are like the alternate world versions of these
Yeah.
similar characters. But um, I was just going to say that. Do you think that this? I mean, you have this aliens theory. Like, does it tie into? Are you planning to tie it into Honkai's story at all, or are you trying to stay away from Honkai because that is a different game? Like, what is your thoughts on the connection between the two games right now?
Like I said, my original theory on this channel was all about the connections between Genshin and
Right.
Honkai. Um, I will say with like 100% certainty that I do think the games are connected at that route.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I want to point out that Star Rail takes place in an alternate dimension, I think. Right? because
I
Will
that I
goes
so
through
far
Will
I believe
goes
so.
through like a wormhole with Void Archives, and then he comes back, and then APHO happens, and then he leaves again, and I can't remember if he's like trapped on the other side of the wormhole or what.
I mean, well, it seems like
I
he's doing
forget.
fine in Star Rail. Like, so
Yeah, but like they're trying to keep the game separate to the point don't have to play one to understand the other. But if you
right.
play multiple, you guess get more out of it. It's the same way as like if you play multiple Zelda games, like suddenly you're more attached to certain races or
Yes.
characters or enemy types
Well, I
as
mean,
you've
we
encountered
could
them
do a
elsewhere
totally
before.
different
Stuff like
podcast on Zelda theory because I love Zelda theory, but
that.
um,
No, it's just an example. It's just an example because like
yeah,
that's like
no,
one of
it's a
those
great
theories that's
example.
like
Yeah,
keeps
they're
recycling
connected, but
over and
they're
over
not
and over
connected.
again.
It's like
It's like a
like
Pokemon game, right? Like you don't have to
yeah,
play every Pokemon game in order to understand the latest one.
yeah,
But
or
like
like
if you
Final
do play the other
Fantasy.
ones, you'll probably get a lot more out of it because like you'll see, one or two characters or references or even original Pokemon. You're just like, oh man, I remember when such and such happened. Like you'll get that little Easter eggy kind of bonus out of it.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
So
Um,
there's that. But okay, so hang on.
yes.
Never mind. I was gonna
Are you
go on
sure? Are you
this
sure?
whole thing, and then I realized I probably shouldn't do that.
No, no, go
For
for it.
those that are worried that you need to play Genshin or Honkai Impact in order to play Star Rail, because like that's the big topic right now, because it's in live beta.
Hmm.
Um, you don't have to know anything about either game to play that one, for sure.
Yeah.
They're
Like
they're
Pokemon.
yeah, it's again like a Pokemon or even like a Genshin, because like in Genshin even like the quote unquote XPs aren't really 1-to-1 XPs.
Yeah, they just
Like
look
Mm.
smaller.
the Mei in Genshin is not anything in Mei and Honkai, and actually she's not even right in Mei, she's Dr. Mei, but that's another thing altogether. And like I'll hate
Yeah.
them. People say like, "Oh, well that's, Sue from Honkai Impact." And I'm like, "Well, no. I mean, it's kind of a little bit Sue, but it's actually mostly Kevin." So like
That's what
you
I was
look
gonna
at them
say.
and you realize that they're all mashups of two or more characters, and so that's why
Right.
they don't fit like a 1-to-1, right?
Yeah. I mean, the
Like
one
the
to one
Yae
are
Miko
like
is nothing like Yae Sakura, like
Yai Sakura.
nothing.
Yeah, no. Like,
They're not alike at all. But like if you took Alicia and you squished her together with Yae Sakura, you
hmm
would probably end up with something that seemed a lot more like Yae Miko.
yeah. Like I
You think
even
about it, like
playing like
personality
Star Rail
wise,
with the new
fine.
characters, they also have a lot of like similar mash two characters together vibes. Like even now
Yeah.
including Genshin characters, like people are, able to pull from the Genshin pool of characters now. Um, so I mean, it's the Hoyoverse. It's the same artist doing different stuff, but like same stuff. I don't know, and like, but it's what's really interesting is how they what I hope is how they eventually decide to connect them more canonically, like more solid, like show us a solid connection. It doesn't even have to be like you have to play this game for any reason, but if they just give us more, I think it would be really interesting. But at the same time, part of us just seeing that, I think, is part of the fun part of playing all of their games, which is like what I plan to do. So, um, so we'll see in the future. But definitely, I agree that you don't need to play the other games. You don't have to play Honkai to play Genshin. You don't have to play Honkai to play Honkai Star Rail. You don't have to play um, Star Rail to play Genshin or vice versa or anything. So
You don't have to
if
play
you are
Gun
worried
Girl
about
Z
that,
to play Honkai Impact. You don't have to play Fly
oh
Me to the
yeah,
Moon to play Gun Girl Z. Like you don't have to do
fly me
that.
to the moon.
It's just
Yeah, I mean
no one
Kiana's
plays
and
that
all of them,
anymore.
but so uh, but yeah, so yeah, well, thanks for that. I mean, I'm sure there are people out there. I actually personally thought I had to play Honkai to play Star Rail until I started playing it, and then I realized like the nature of the game, and then like how it ties to Genshin, and then once I learned about Star Rail, I was like, oh, I actually don't need to play it. So for anyone out there worrying, don't worry, play at your own pace, and yeah, we appreciate that. So the other thing that we wanted to talk about to kind of close out the podcast is like your next thoughts. So like going forward. So like what are you excited about for like because right now we still have a lot of lore to go in the desert, right? And we talked a lot about the desert. But what is
Yeah.
it that you are most excited to learn about, or what do you want to learn about that's just like kind of sitting there that you're like, I need to figure this out? Can you share with everybody?
I would like an excuse to share some thoughts on Conria. Again, I made a pretty
Oh, go
divisive
for it.
video on Conria a while ago, claiming they did nothing wrong, and
They did nothing wrong video.
comments
Yeah, that's what I
comments
thought.
are pretty split. Um, pretty split on that, and I really want to learn more about the Fatui because they kind of confuse me in terms of what they're trying to do. And like I feel like the factions in Genshin are not as defined as as they are in Honkai. Like the factions in Honkai are like really defined and really deliberate. This is my goal, this is what we're working on, blah blah blah, right?
Mm.
In Genshin, they're like a lot looser right now. Like you can kind of be like, oh well, the Fatui want to burn away the old world and make a new world, and I'm like, okay, the Abyss Order might want to resurrect the old world. Okay, well, Danesliv's like, well,
Not
we're gonna defy
all.
this world. Well, what does that mean, right? Like, and then
What
what
are
does
you,
the
what's your
Traveler
goal?
do and all that? Like there's so many unknowns in terms of like what the actual goals are and how they intersect. Right now I'd really like to learn more about the Abyss Order and again Conria because I feel like we haven't had as much focus on them for a while. And I think a lot of that's because we were dealing with Scaramouche and Erminsel and Dottore and kind of like setting that up. But now that we
Hmm.
have that context, I'm like, okay, now give us some Abyss Order stuff. Because like we need some Abyss Order stuff. We haven't actually had them do anything significant since Mondstadt.
This might be a good time for Dane's Left to show up and start talking about the Celestial Nail.
That would be
Mm.
nice. That would be nice.
That
Do
would
you
be
think we'll
nice.
get this information in Fontaine?
I will be surprised if we don't get information before then. Like I feel like getting to Fontaine to me is more of a Fatui place. I think the Fatui are gonna this has actually been a thing. The only time that we've had the Abyss Order show up in the primary, that's it. Every other time the Abyss Order's shown up, it's been in a side quest or an interlude or um a Dainsliff type thing, right? Like it's almost never in the main Archon quest.
Right. I mean, it's like a necessary, you have to play interlude, but and I think this is the perfect time for that.
Yeah,
But
because like we have so much exploration material out there already. Like I know a lot of people are so overwhelmed with it. The desert is massive and it's full of tunnels and caves and like holy cow. Um
mhm.
and then there's been so much story content, new characters, like side quests, the world quest for 3.4. Like, I know a lot of people never did the Golden Slumber, and they're like, wait, you mean like the whole new desert area is about this quest that I need this other quest to do
Right.
first? What?
This giant quest that you need.
And they're like, okay, well, I'll just do that quest first. And then they realize that quest takes like 6 hours to complete. And they're like,
Yeah.
oh, right?
I can
Like,
tell you that
there's
second
all
one.
of that. There's all of that. But yeah, so a
To
bit
be fair,
Order, in Fontaine seems more Harbinger based, way more Harbinger based, and a lot of that I think has to do with if I don't know if you guys are familiar with the theory behind Deep Blue versus Kasparov.
Oh no, could you
could you talk more
enlighten
Chess
us?
about that?
theory. So in the early days of AI,
Mhm.
which we're in the thick of right now,
For real.
in the early days of AI, like the goal was to make a computer able to beat a chess title holding chess champion in a real match, real uh, competitive settings.
Right.
And so they finally did that with an iteration of an AI called Deep Blue. And at the time, the chess master in question was Gary Kasparov, and they played a total of 6 games, and Kasparov won most of them, or he had a draw with them. And then Deep Blue, I think, won like a couple of different games, like two. I think Blue won two, and then there were 2 draws. No, Deep Blue won two, drew once, and then Kasparov won the rest. I think. Hang on.
But
This
point is,
actually isn't that important, but it's gonna
they made an
bother me if I
AI,
don't.
like they made an AI that was able to best a and or
Right.
play out to a draw a like chess champion, right?
Yeah, hang on. I just wanted to.
You want
It's
to know
gonna
the
drive me
numbers?
crazy.
I got you.
It's gonna drive me crazy if I don't know my actual numbers here, because they've actually played again. They played once in 1996 and then again in 1997. 1996. Okay, Kasparov won four.
Hmm.
Oh no. Okay. Well, yeah. Okay, he won four, lost two. Okay, there were two draws.
It was a 4-2.
Yeah, it
Oh, I
was two
see.
draws. But the second rematch had them with three draws. And it was 3.5 to 2.5. So you could start to see the gap start to close. Um, oh no, Deep Blue won more in 1997. Kasparov lost more. So it flipped. It went
Yeah,
from
Deep Blue won three and a
Kasparov
half.
winning 4 to 2 to Deep Blue winning 3 to 2, basically, in the course of a
Mm.
year. Anyway, sorry. The point is, in the Winter Lazo trailer, that game that Piero is playing on that chessboard is match one of 1996. It's a very, 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 very famous match. Um,
Wow.
and if you look at game two, it actually lines up really well with the events of Sumeru. And that was the one where I believe Kasparov won instead. Yes? Is that right? I think so. Anyway, yeah,
Jeez,
Kasparov won that one.
that's
Deep
so
Blue won the
detailed.
first game. Deep Blue won the
Yeah.
first game. Kasparov won the second, and then the next two games were draws. If you look at game three, um, game three should be Fontaine,
Mm-hmm.
and they draw there. And the way I was looking at the chessboard made me realize that, like, since Celestia is currently hovering over Fontaine, and Fontaine is the nation of justice, and if you read like the gem description for the Hydro Archon gem, you'll realize that she talks about how she's so pure that not even heavens can judge her because she's stainless, like they have no dirt on her, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And that, to me, that's just begging for trouble, like being like, "Oh, you're tempting God. Yeah, smite me down if you dare. You can't hurt me." And Celestia is like, "Oh yeah."
I'm so curious what
Uh,
role the Traveler is going to play in Fontaine in this
but
chess game.
that's why I think the Archon quests are gonna like mostly stay that way. We're talking about chess. The Gnosis are chess pieces. The Abyss Order has no interest in the Gnosis, as far as we can tell.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So it's a
so they
chess
have
game
no
between
reason to be,
Celestia and the Fatui.
more or less, yeah. So like
Interesting.
the way I see it, I see it as more like the Abyss Order is like another plot. It's like a secondary plot, or even
Hmm.
the primary
Oh,
plot. It's hard to say, but like the chess plot is the Archon quests with the chess pieces because the Fatui is playing chess currently.
right. It is the Archon quest line, right? So like it's about
Yeah,
the nations and Archons. So we're not even.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Dainsleif is still called an Archon quest, but he's like in his own category.
Oh, really?
I'm gonna check. Hold up. Hold up.
This is when we get to the real stuff where we have to like look up stuff as we're talking.
Yeah,
I can't help
I'm
but
looking at a
think
really
this
basic
is
thing
the
though.
underlying cause of a lot of these things. Like the true big bad, or they were the good guys all along kind of thing. The Remember when Lumine or Ether, depending on who you play, said that you will learn the truth about this world. That is pretty ominous.
Yep.
Oh yeah, it is
Yeah,
Archon quest.
they are part of the Archon quest, yeah.
Chapter 1, Act 4, we will be reunited.
But
Oh man.
it's like its own Archon symbol. It's got the twins as the symbol.
Hmm.
So it's
Because
like
it's
its
not
Okay.
own
political
thing.
region, yes.
Yeah.
What was that?
They're traveler chapters, they're just counted under the Archon quest thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good to know. Yeah. So, I mean, we have like, we're excited for that. Is there something that you are specifically about for Fontaine? Like, you know, It could be lore wise. It could be just
Underwater
like,
exploration.
oh, I mean, it is a water place, right?
If we're ever
That's
gonna
good.
get underwater exploration, it better be in Fontaine. I want to go underwater.
Right.
Oh,
And again, that brings us back to like our very first topic of this whole podcast where we were talking about like underwater, like Enkanomiya actually being underwater. Are there things in
right.
deep waters? Are there any ruins?
Mhm.
I want to go
And the
underwater.
space between Inazuma and Liyue.
Yeah.
Maybe
Also, the
Kokomi's
way
passive
the
will be
map
she
is
doesn't need to
going,
breathe.
the way the map is going, the interesting thing is that Fontaine looks like it might be the only nation to be landlocked, and it's the nation of
Oh,
water.
so we don't think
Wow.
it's gonna be like next to that Mondstadt port. Is it gonna be like in the middle?
No, I think Snezhnaya is north there. I mean, like this is just like,
Based on real life geography, like
well,
Naya is
Snezhnaya is
cold,
called
so
the
it must be
Northland.
the north, right?
Right, right.
Snezhnaya is called the Northlands.
That's true.
Land should either be west or south, depending on how you read uh, some of the stuff. So like that just leaves Fontaine and Snezhnaya to the north or the northwest, really.
I see.
And
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure, oh, I could be wrong, um, that they said that Fontaine is to the north of Sumeru, which,
I
depending on
see.
how the desert curves around, might still
Right.
mean that Fontaine is landlocked.
Okay. Well, we'll see. Do you think we'll
Because
go to
Snezhnaya should
Fontaine
be all the way to the
next?
north.
And
Oh
like,
yeah, 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 yeah.
okay, okay. Because I'm like curious, like, when do we go back to Mondstadt? It's like I want to kind of want to go back to Mondstadt.
I feel like
Um,
we go back to Mondstadt for Dormant Port before going to Fontaine. Just a feeling.
I don't think we'll go to Dornman Port this before Fontaine. Well, because like if we follow previous patches, then Fontaine should
Mm-hmm.
be like in 3.8, and we're going into 3.5 now. Um,
Mm,
Mm,
so if 3 point, like let's say hypothetically 3.5 brings a new area, because we need at least one more area in Sumeru in order to get the rest of the oculi.
right.
And we should
mhm.
at least be able to max out the statue of seven before we go to the next region, right? So we need at least one more
Right.
region before we go to Fontaine for Sumeru. So we've only
Right.
got 3 patches within that to happen. And there are
That's
3
good.
potential areas that we can get. We can get one for Sumeru. We can potentially get the tea village in Liwa, or we can get Dornport in Mondstadt. We could get any one of those 3, or we could get all 3. I don't think we'll get all 3, but we
I don't
could.
think we'll get all three.
But the
Yeah,
reason I
that's
don't think
pretty
we'll get
much.
Dormant Port is because, like, usually in 3.8, it's the Golden Apple Archipelago.
Mm.
So the
Mm.
Oh,
only way
right, right. If
Dormant
we follow that,
Port is if it's also connected to the archipelago or whatever the summer event type thing is. That's the only reason why I would think we would get it in 3.8. Um, but then, like, the whole Guizhong thing in Lantern, right? Like, events in Genshin always foreshadow big Archon quests or main story beats.
Would you
Um,
give an example?
well, yeah, like Iridori and Scaramouche, for example. Even if you just like look at the paintings that Albedo
the
did,
art, yeah. It's the
um,
balladeer.
but he
Oh
vanishes, right?
no.
Yeah.
Like
Yep.
he has a vanishing portrait. He's the only one with a vanishing portrait. And like it seems like such a weird thing, but then you realize the reason why like the furniture that you have in the teapot of that same painting, like
Mm-hmm.
the has no image of Scaramouche on it is because he deleted himself from Irminsul.
Right.
So it was like foreshadowing his whole thing. Plus, it was foreshadowing Kazua's story quest. Plus, it was talking about the stuff at the ride in Gokuden. Plus, it was kind of like it was doing all those sorts of things. And then this year's Apple Archipelago was all about dreams. Um, and lo and behold, we go to Sumeru. What's the first thing that we encounter? This big Samsara dream that we have
There's
to get out of, right? Like
the
so,
dream
so
scheme.
right. So like all of these events that have these really heavy story beats to them, that feels
Mm-hmm.
super lore relevant in some way or another, like especially this Guizhong one, makes you realize, maybe there's actually something coming with this, like soon. And we know that there's at least one region of Liwa left, and that's the Tea Village.
That's true. So you think it
So
foreshadows the coming of the tea village?
I think so. The reason for it is because the Echoes of an Offering set, that artifact set, seems to reference I actually think it's Ping in there. Someone in my Discord pointed this out to me. Like a week ago, maybe. Um, because Ping is actually a fish. Whether she's a koi
Right.
or a carp, it's kind of up to interpretation. But she's a fish. Like
Fish
she's an
vibes.
adeptus fish. Um, and that whole Echoes of an Offering set is all set up in that area, that Tea Village. Talks about like the mountain's master, and there's Ping who wins a swing race, like that kind of stuff. So that ties it kind of back to Liwa, and like that was also the domain with Zhao's set in there for Bosacius. Um, so I think that's why I think the Tea Village is coming, because like Dorman Port has no other mentions other than like a couple of tiny character mentions, whereas the Tea Village has been much more foreshadowed.
All right. Lantern Rite event. That could give
Yeah.
us more insight to Liwei's history in general.
Well, yeah. There's that. But like they could have picked anything else, but they didn't.
Hmm.
I guess that's kind of the point. Like the thing is Venti was part of it, sort
Right.
of. I still think he feels tacked on, but like I guess I comment section has
Right.
told me that
Venti and
I'm not
Hutao.
correct on that. I still think that I'm entitled to that opinion. I still feel like he feels a bit tacked on, especially after we got teased with that Zhao
The Xiao
video.
Venti. Yeah.
Yeah, like that we got teased with that interaction between them, and then like they gave us, yeah, it didn't feel satisfying, I guess is what I mean. But even though they had the opportunity to bring him in there, they had the opportunity to make him more involved in that kind of stuff. And if they had, I would have been more inclined to believe that Dormant Port would have been next. Um, right now, I'm
Right.
not necessarily convinced that it is,
Well,
unless
like
it's
you said, we
connected to the
still
Golden
have
Apple Archipelago.
we still have three more patches too to see what happens with Sumeru and where the story ends up going from there. Like, who knows? We could meet like some random character that ties us and brings
The
us
live
one
stream on
direction.
Friday.
Live stream on Friday? Oh, is it?
Is the live stream on Friday? Like it should be this week, right?
I don't
It is.
believe it was announced yet, was it?
Well, it's not announced yet, but like pattern wise,
It's
it should be
usually
this
on
week.
Oh,
yeah.
It's
I think
usually on
so.
Fridays.
Yeah,
Or
because
is
the
on,
last
yeah.
banner just started, right? So
Yeah, so like they should be doing that so that we'll see the new characters. We'll see if there's going to be any region in 3.5. If there's no new region in 3.5, then you've got 6, 7, and 8. That got you'd have to have one new region per thing before Fontaine. But even then, I think like 3.8 should foreshadow Fontaine. So
yeah,
we'll see.
yeah. I mean, well, it'll
Like
have to right before we move on to cities.
Yeah.
like how the Golden Apple Archipelago introduced Nahida.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically.
I
Yeah.
see. We
Okay.
love
Well,
Nahida.
yeah. Do you have any closing thoughts for us, Ashikai, before we wrap up the podcast?
Um Take chances, make mistakes, and get messy.
Said by the wise Ashikai, the lore archon of Genshin Impact.
I stole those words from my mentor, Miss Frizzle.
Miss Frizzle.
Stealing
Oh
is
man,
good.
I knew I should have stayed home today.
I
I
don't
don't
have a
know.
magic school of
I don't
this,
know.
but I do have a magic Paimon.
The magic Paimon. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for that, Ashkai. Thanks again for joining us on the podcast today.
Yeah.
Thanks for
We
having me. This
had
was
so
fun.
much
It's so
fun.
nice to talk
Yeah.
to you.
And yeah. So, is there like one last time? Where can everyone find you? Your socials, your website, your Discord. Like, let us know. Where is it?
Uh, I am on YouTube 95% of the time, and I'm on Twitter sometimes if you want to see some minor chaos works in progress, random lore thoughts. that kind of stuff. It's Twitter/Ashikai and then YouTube/Ashikai. Both of those. I don't have any other socials. I don't have the energy to keep up any other socials. I don't know how all you guys do it. That's crazy.
We don't.
Um, I do have a Discord, but the reason I don't promote it is because it's technically a membership perk for YouTube.
Oh
So if you
yeah.
join as a YouTube member, you get access to the Discord. And a lot of that's just because like moderation of a public server is very difficult, and I'm trying to keep the
Yeah.
community as respectful and mature as I can.
Yeah.
And that's hard
Yeah. Well, that's
otherwise.
great. Well, there you go. I mean, if you what's up, Cipher?
I guess it's like a close-knit community if it's small.
Yeah, but there you go.
Yeah.
If you want to join Ashikai's community, go ahead and follow their YouTube and join, subscribe, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Hit that like button and subscribe. Right.
I
So
promise I will never ask you to do that.
that's okay. We'll do it for you. So, um,
And that
everyone, thank you
concludes
so much.
our podcast.
For
Don't
today,
forget to hit the follow button for this podcast, though.
Yeah.
Yes, don't forget to
Okay.
follow Coffee and Culture Official. Thank you, Ashikai. And
for joining us today
we
again.
also what's up, Cipher?
Thank you for joining us today again.
Thank
Yeah,
you for
thank you again
having
for joining
me
us.
on.
And Coffee and Culture, Genshin. If you're not already following the podcast, if you're here from either my server or you're here from Ashikai's following, join the Coffee and Culture official Discord where we talk about Hoyoverse lore in general. So
Cool.
lots of fun interactions
Yeah.
to be had.
We're
Right?
nerds.
We're nerds, yes. So, um, so yeah. So my name is Josh, aka Jside. I also do the Genshin Guys podcast. So just search up Genshin Guys, and you can find me as well. And
And I'm the
yeah,
other host.
and Cipher.
Yeah,
Where can they find you, Cipher?
you don't.
You don't, or find Cipher
You're
in the Coffee and
invisible.
Culture uh podcast. Speaking of Coffee and Culture Discord server, we'll be doing, I believe, like a karaoke event in about an hour or so. So if it's something you're interested in, feel free to join as well. The description should be in the channel, in the socials links in Twitch. So everybody, I want to thank you again for showing up and talking in the chat, for coming around for the discussion. Thank you again last time, Ashkai, and hope you all have a great day.
Bye bye.
Thank you. You too. Happy
Bye.
Saturday or Sunday. Happy weekend.